Hello, welcome to a very special episode of Back to the City. I have Lady Midnight with me. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. The reason why this is a special episode is that this is part one of a two-part conversation we just in the last 20 minutes or so determined. Because we're on the horizon next month of the inaugural Back to the City Presents Music Heals Us event. And it struck me that Back to the City has always had a focus on healing and the various different roles that music can play in healing, whether it's songwriting, whether it's dancing, all kinds of other ways. I think all of them will be covered today.
Wow, awesome.
And if they're not, they'll be covered, I think, in part two of our conversation, which will happen after a sound journey, which is led by Annie Fitzgerald, and prior to a movement workshop, which will transform into a hip-hop set by Chance York. So this will happen this is the early show at the VFW on Saturday, August 3rd, beginning at 7 p.m. After Annie's led us through the sound journey, prior to Chance leading a movement workshop, what will occur?
We'll be talking about my film, Pursuit in the Elusive, which is based basically off of my album of the same name, or at least it draws heavily from themes from the album. And what's interesting about it is that it is a short film that was created for VR headset. And so it'll be interesting to be able to show this to an audience, knowing that it's been created for this very kind of special experience in VR.
We will have shown the 15-minute short film, which in the meantime, between this interview and part two, that film will have been shown at a film festival?
Yes, yeah. I just found out that it was accepted as in a VR segment, a VR category, a film festival in Italy. Yeah.
You have been collaborating with REM5?
I've been collaborating with an artist who works at REM5. His name is Brian Skalick. I have collaborated, kind of partnered officially with REM5 VR. They're an AI or AR and VR company based out of St. Louis Park. They do a lot of different kind of like experiences through headset, using like different 360 technology and also different programming. They have their own metaverse. They'll work with different companies, like even the Twins, for example, creating like a virtual museum, Hall of Fame museum. But they're a really interesting company that does do work with different school and community groups, but also just have kind of like a diverse array of entertainment as well.
I think the moment when it struck me when I was doing my prep for this interview that you would actually be the ideal artist to place between Annie and Chance was when I was reading a post of yours about how we can't make room for joy if we are holding on to fear, guilt, and negativity, which is a central focus in Pursuit and the Elusive, both the album and the short film. And then you, in that same post, you went on to provide an invitation for readers of the post to practice letting go with your new work, Practice for Relief. And that's also something that was made in collaboration, if I understand correctly, with REM5. The focus on practice and the practice of letting go and the intentional practice of making room for joy by letting go of fear and guilt and negativity. Could you say a little bit about that work of yours, Practice for Relief?
Yeah, so that was a concept that came out in 2020. Essentially, it was a piece that I did back then in collaboration with the Cedar Cultural Center and with REM5, because we really weren't able to gather in person. I think I was a bit burnt out by all of the like web series and like live concert series on Zoom, and I just thought maybe there's another way, another experience in which we could gather. Is there sort of a space that could simulate sort of the sound, like being in a room of live musicians? And I was able to connect with Brian Skalick and pitch this concept around essentially spatial audio in a virtual space. And it wasn't something that he was familiar with before. I think that himself or his company had done. So it was sort of like an interesting challenge at the time. And I worked with 3 different musicians to create this kind of improvised composition set to a particular frequency of 396 hertz.
What's the significance of that frequency? I'm familiar with this kind of thing.
Right.
But
Well, that in particular was kind of, I guess, promoted to be able to release feelings around guilt or fear or shame. And it's also sort of associated with like the root chakra.
Yeah.
I went into kind of a rabbit hole during that time around how sound can really help with healing.
I was down the same rabbit hole on the other side of the planet.
Yeah. And I came across what's known as like solfeggio frequencies. And I just found it really interesting. And, you know, granted, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but I am an artist, and I feel like that gives me license to create sort of experiential, experimental works that deal with sound and deal with healing. And so this was kind of, again, it was sort of a concept to see both if spatial audio could work in a virtual space, and also to see when given that intention around creating a composition to be able to kind of relinquish that feeling, what would happen. So what's been exciting is that I've been able to expand on that piece, and later this summer I'm going to be actually holding a virtual event, which I'll invite you to experience not just one level of that, but 3 levels of that.
3 levels?
Yeah, I'll explain a little bit. So
Sure.
the first one that we did was in a particular, just one room.
Okay.
And it was just kind of like walking, you kind of get plopped in as an avatar. And you have to walk down this little corridor into a platform where you experience the piece. But this sort of redesign is a bit different because it'll be in a larger space with other artists who have done other types of virtual artwork in a gallery of sorts. It's a metaverse that REM 5 is the host of. And in this space, you'll come across it. The structure, which is a 3-story structure, each floor of the structure has a different frequency and a different composition.
Is one of the frequencies the one that you were using for the
practice for relief?
Practice for relief?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm glad that the answers to these questions are what they are. At that same time, I was stuck in England during the pandemic. I didn't want to be the person that brought the Delta variant back from England, so I was stuck at my parents' home for 18 months. And during that time, I was also, I was very interested in the chakras, and I found the frequencies for each of the chakras, and I would meditate to each one, focusing on that area, and there was, I think, literally no one that I could
talk to
about the process, and I did not expect that to emerge now.
Well,
But,
it's great because we can geek out about it later. But yeah,
Absolutely.
the first one is the root chakra. The second level is the solar plexus. And the last level is the throat. And I'd love to be able to expand on this idea even further, but the piece itself is called My Body Electric. And I just wanted to kind of continue to investigate this idea of sound, but also virtual space. I think particularly for anybody who sort of like needs, I guess, a departure from their environment and can go into another one to really kind of meditate and immerse themselves. I know that like probably the best medicine is subjective to each person, and in no way can I simulate like nature. But I think that's really not the point. The idea of it is to really be able to kind of like immerse yourself and to see how technology can be used for good, at least within my frame and intention is to be able to
Absolutely.
use it for good.
So the three chakras are the root, the solar plexus, and the throat. Those are the three chakras that you're providing these virtual spaces that are equivalent to or related to.
Yeah.
And there's a really clear connection with your music. Say, on Death Before Morning from 2019, one of the songs is called Say It. Obviously, that relates to the throat chakra and the capacity to communicate one's reality. A number of your songs explore this theme of self-expression. Do you have any thoughts about the throat chakra, perhaps, and Say It, and or other music of yours that focuses on this area?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps this is answering that question or finding that correlation. I think most artists are going to create work that kind of reflects their experience and reflects their environment or what they're going through. And I do believe that it's always been kind of maybe an impetus, like the work that I create is really more so almost a medicine for myself. I think I use art, I use music in all various forms of media to be able to understand, I think, myself a bit better, and to be able to kind of give myself what I feel that I need in that moment. And so with kind of, you know, these particular frequencies that we mentioned, it's kind of like, how can I make room and space for joy and to let go of this idea of like of suffering, of guilt, of fear, to be able to kind of like bring that into a place of like self-confidence, idea of like self-love and acceptance. And then finally to really be able to like express what that is, you know, in relationship to kind of like moving through that journey. And I would say, yeah, my work, not just like with Say It, but probably with all of my pieces, is an active kind of like declaration and even sort of manifestation of something in the future that either I want to cultivate or giving me knowledge that I may need throughout my journey.
Absolutely, yeah. My first encounter with Lady Midnight, not in person, but the first time I heard Lady Midnight was on the song Shine On,
Oh,
on
great,
Kairos
yeah.
Part 1, Christoph Crane. We are waiting for you, we are here for you, we hear you, we are you, we love you. When I heard those vocals and your vocals throughout that song, that prompted me to seek more Lady Midnight. And what I found when I turned eventually to Death Before Morning was very in keeping with what I first was very drawn to in that song, Shine On. To expand the opening track of Death Before Morning, this is my blood song for all of my loved ones. I feel like that's a very similar territory to the song Shine On and the whole Kairos Part 1 record. And then in the second track, Can't Nobody Take What You Now Know, Can't Nobody Break the Ground You're On. I feel like that for me kind of relates to the solar plexus and this kind of the self-confidence that one can cultivate. And then in the third track, Pattern Control Part 1.
Portion control.
Oh, Portion Control.
Yeah. But I like that you thought it was pattern.
Yes, it's because
it's just the letters.
Yeah,
it could
exactly.
Be anything,
it could be
but
both, couldn't it? I suppose the R's in the wrong place. Portion Control.
Portion Control.
Part 1. That's an even more intriguing title, actually, I think. Then You Shine. Take what you've been given. You shine. So I encountered this same philosophy and even the same imagery of shining on, even just in those first three tracks. How did you end up being involved in this song, Shine On. And could you expand a little bit on the connection, perhaps between Shine On and Death Before Morning, which I think sounds similar in some ways, as well as exploring some other themes?
Yeah, all credit for the lyrics to Christoph Crane on Shine On. I didn't have anything to do with the writing in that, but I do feel that probably similarly to him, and even ways in which he invited me into his community to share kind of like more moments of, I would say, higher consciousness, feelings of interconnectedness within not only human beings, but all living beings. I was also, kind of exploring those themes as well around what really connects us and how that story or that memory can move through experiences and through matter on that meta scale, all matter.
Yeah, matter not being the antithesis of spirit, but rather being connected.
Connected, exactly. Yeah. I suppose, the connection between those lyrics and even the ones that you mentioned around Blood Song or Portion Control is relating to similar themes around the interconnectedness of space, of matter, of consciousness, of spirit. I think that in some ways for me, perhaps this differs from the intention of that song. Maybe it doesn't. I don't want to speak for Christoph.
Oh, sure. Yes.
But perhaps, for me, within the connection of like Blood Song and Portion Control, there's this sense of almost like a history, not necessarily destiny, but of a memory, of a collective memory, or even one that exists within like the molecular structure of our DNA, of even, of what we're made of. This idea that there is something that's for you, there's kind of a role that's already yours. It's your decision if you want to take it, but that it inherently is with you, and that knowledge is kind of like travels with you no matter where you are.
The idea of there being a role that is yours if you want to take it seems absolutely central to me to Pursuit in the Elusive. If we follow the narrative through, and in particular in the song Abel, the character that we encounter there is in the process still of perhaps finding their unique role, and is finding themselves, rather than stepping into that role which is theirs, kind of playing out a story that is not uniquely theirs. And that comes through, I think, in I'll stay beyond the point of Abel. Cain bore witness, heed your fables. Heed your fables is key. I died playing the part of Abel. Cain bore witness, heed your fables. So what is the significance to Pursuit and the Elusive of this recurring focus in the chorus of Abel here on heeding our fables, heeding your fables?
I'm so happy that you had, that analysis of the song, because very much so, I think that like the narrative of that song is kind of playing out a role or a part that isn't inherently yours, or maybe something of which you've kind of like witnessed, you've seen happen before, that of which that feels familiar, but isn't necessarily of your own making. It's just something that you are participating in because it's what you know. All of the themes around Pursuit and the Elusive deal a lot with choice.
Yeah.
Going back to this idea of choice and your stories, your narratives, your fables, the idea of like love is sacrifice, or these things that we're told that if we're behaving in a way of like, I think being a good citizen or playing, what is expected of us.
Obviously, the song "Good." If people know the record, the song "Good" is pertinent to
Yeah,
this part of the conversation.
Then, we will, I guess, be accepted, and that if we don't kind of like go along with what's been assigned to us, or if we don't participate in these stories, that somehow we're being selfish, or somehow we're sort of like degenerates of society in some ways.
Not a good girl, not a good sister, not a good...
a selfish, a boastful, just sort of self-serving,
Right. If we focus again on the chakras, when I was doing those meditations and I was focusing on the solar plexus, I was focusing on my self-confidence. There's a style of focus on the self that I was intentionally doing with that specific meditation.
Yeah.
That's not selfish.
It's not alienating anybody else.
Yes.
It's just kind of taking stock of who am I on kind of like a conscious level? Who am I on even a metaphysical level?
Yeah.
Like, what is really mine and belongs to me?
Yep.
And I think that idea of heed your fables, I mean, I'm talking, particularly there's a biblical reference with the story of Cain and Abel, but also this idea around like sacrifice, and this idea that to be accepted or to have something that's worthwhile, you need to sacrifice something in order for it to be considered, I think just, or even in a way that feels genuine. And sometimes that even the act of sacrifice can become something that is self-serving, this idea that I've given so much of myself and therefore I am deserving, and look at, making yourself a martyr of sorts.
Savior complex.
Yes, exactly. But it's not really about the other person or the other community. It's really about kind of building yourself up, that who are you if you are not in service to others?
Yeah, well, I'm the savior.
Yeah.
This is who I am. I'm here to save everyone.
Exactly.
The way in which one gets caught up in focusing on the self when one is in that mode can be more detrimental to oneself and others than the way in which one is focusing on oneself when one is building up one's self-confidence through, for example, listening to the frequency of the solar plexus. This is a seg to BFW on stage post Pursuit in the Elusive short film showing conversation, because the synopsis of the short film is a vengeful private eyes hunting down a shape-shifting culprit linked to her father's murder, only to discover death may not be the revenge she was seeking. And I think that obviously the conversation that we're having at the moment about casting oneself in the role of Abel and the attempt to be a savior or to enact vengeance relates to this synopsis. Could you expand a little bit on the synopsis and how what we've just been talking about in relation to different ways of focusing on the self relates to the short film that we will show at the Music Heals Us 1 event?
Yeah, I think in relationship to everything we've talked about, it's very easy to get caught up, I think, in other people's battles and feel like we have the ability to even fight anyone else's battles, that it's that either in our loyalty or our pursuit of redemption, it sort of can become a compulsion. And you will see, hopefully, the viewers of this interview will also be able to see the film and see the transformation, I think, of the main character, who is kind of brutally becoming aware that even though initially she might have thought that this was her role to play, that actually it was never her fight. It was never her battle, and that really she was engaging in another battle of the self to be able to understand what really belongs to her, what she can change and what she can't change.
Excellent.
And that can be really difficult, I think, and devastating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really resonates. We're all on our individual path. But on an abstract level, what is true for the protagonist in this short film is true for each of us, as distinct as each of our paths.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think there's also kind of like this focus on, which is a theme that I'm obviously a bit fascinated with, but this idea of death and this idea of rebirth. I think sometimes we can be impatient for that to happen, and so we can go into these modes of self-destruction and say, okay, well, just like I'll die already. Let me just, self-destruct, and that isn't really the pathway to rebirth. In some ways, it's something that you have to surrender to.
There is the risk of, are you familiar with the phrase spiritual bypassing?
I'm not, no.
So where I might be using spiritual terminology or like a story where I'm very spiritual, I'm undergoing this ego death, say. But one can use that terminology and that framework to actually keep one stuck.
Yeah.
And one can romanticize the idea of like, oh, I'm so spiritual, I'm constantly shedding all of this stuff, and the ego can get involved in that too, of course. Like what part of me is constructing this self-aggranding story about how spiritual I am? Right. It's the ego.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be like more comfortable to dematerialize all the time instead of being, I guess, having that patience or even that discomfort to really hold the parts of yourself without judgment, which is very difficult to do. I think
the process of integrating these different components, or acknowledging and integrating. I have the same obsession with death and rebirth and the archetype of the phoenix. So much of your art resonates because of that. In this song, Following Abel, Take Shape in Your Love, that's where I feel that we encounter this protagonist stepping into their own story. Knowing that you hold a story still untold is a lyric. All of my life, all that I needed was inside me. Could you say a little bit more about this process of stepping into one's own story and the paradoxical idea of it actually kind of emerging? It was always within me in the first place.
Without getting too personal, I think that like there's circumstances in which we can get, again, wrapped up in other people's vision or story or idea of like what we're supposed to do and like what our meaning is in a grander scheme. And I think that can really put a lot of focus externally on what we're supposed to ingest or even what we're supposed to even like program within ourselves, almost kind of like oppressing our own voice or our own desires or kind of like an internal judgment of what our intuition is telling us or even what our instinct is. And I feel like with that particular song, it really is around what we were talking about earlier of kind of like holding your own shape, holding your own space, really being able to kind of listen to yourself in your own voice and recognizing that all along, you know, there's been signals kind of telling you what to do, whether that's taking like a full body scan of like energetically what you're feeling, like, do I feel anxious? Do I feel tired? Do I feel excited? Do I feel relaxed? Because as animals, as beings, we're always getting information and our body is also talking to us. And so being able to kind of like listen to that, but also listen to our own kind of, I think, understanding of, and I guess history of like when I've done this thing before, how did that make me feel? Like, did I feel energized? Did I feel depleted? Did I feel safe? Did I feel empowered? Did I feel the opposite of
Was I
those
giving
things?
my power away? Was
Exactly.
I in my power? Yeah.
So then, really, I think that it's not saying that you yourself, are always going to have all the answers, but I do think that a lot of it is learning about how to authentically just be, and letting that act of that guide you, as opposed to reaching out or kind of having an unbalanced approach of external factors making the decision for you on like your actions. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, yes, it does make sense
Yeah,
to me. Take shape in your love. For me, the heart chakra seems pertinent to this, and for me, it's significant that is, of course, between the solar plexus and the throat, and for, like, a way I find that's helpful to think, is this action that seems right to me actually in alignment with who I am? To be familiar with the frequency of love, and think, well, is this thing that I feel maybe compelled to do, perhaps because of external influences, or perhaps no, I feel that it's right. Like, is it in the frequency of love? Is this the loving thing to do? That seems, and this take shape in your love. I mean, it seems to be a song about remaining in that frequency of love and growing through checking. It's a good litmus test. Does this seem to be in the frequency of love?
And if you suffer from, I think, like poor self-love, it might be really hard to do that. You know?
Absolutely, yeah.
But I do feel like at the end of the day, you have to be, it sounds cliche, but you have to be the change that you want to see. So the more that you love yourself, I think the more that you have kind of like patience for kind of an external world that you can't affect as easily. That's a great place to kind of begin, is to start.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that when I was isolated in England with no one to communicate with apart from my parents, I was doing a lot of work on that. And in my experience, that was very transformative. The next song on the record, we seem to be, for these three songs at least, we seem to be taking a kind of journey through the song track.
Surprisingly, serendipitously.
Is Father, Figure, which I think is a really clever title for a song, and I think the song delivers as well. It's a clever song. Father Figure is my go-to song at karaoke. George Michael, Father Figure.
Awesome.
I know very well that the chorus goes, I will be your father figure, put your tiny hand in mine. I will be your preacher, teacher, anything you have in mind. I will be your father figure, I have had enough of crime. I will be the one that loves you till the end of time. There is a lot of the character there is, there's an analogy with the Abel song. It's like, I will be this archetype. I will be the father in relation to you. So it's interesting to recognize that that's what the George Michael song is doing. And on the back of everything that we were just saying, there is scope for things to go wrong. If that is what one is doing. It's like, my identity is wholly to be the father figure to you. That's a risky stance for the reasons we were just elaborating. Presumably, there's, to some extent, the song Father, Figure is engaging in conversation, would you say, with the George Michael song Father Figure? Is that the case?
It's not. But I love that you brought that into it.
Well, what thoughts do you presently have?
I'm always like very curious, and also like, very glad when people bring their own, I guess, like their own reading into my work, or their own kind of correlations with other people's work within mine. I'm not familiar with the song.
You've not heard the song?
I've never heard it before.
Oh,
but I'm
George
gonna
Michael does
listen
it
to
better.
it.
George Michael does it
I
better
mean,
than I do. Certainly when
I only know a few of George Michael's songs, but I know who George Michael is. Amazing artist,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think for me, like that particular song, again, it's very personal, but I think it is probably touching on similar themes of what an archetype is. And it's complex, you know. I think that there might be sort of these expectations that that particular role will be very loving. There'll be a lot of kind of guidance, you know. It's a parental position and responsibility to help kind of like, you know, raise somebody and do that in a way that's discerning, that's bringing past experiences and kind of helping navigate and protect that person through the world. But conversely, when there's an absence of that in your life, then those roles kind of get fractured and it's put on several people as you grow up. You have not a father, but a father figure, and you might have multiple ones, and you might even be searching for that in partnership or
consciously
in
or
friendships.
unconsciously.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the George Michael song also goes, whatever you ask for, that's what I'll be. There is something, of course, very real and beautiful about someone being able to be a loving figure to others and to hold that in integrity. And then there's also something risky in I'll be whatever you want me to be.
Yeah.
Because there's a risk of loss of self. And if one loses oneself, then one can't hold that frequency.
Well, you might even lose yourself because you're holding that frequency.
Oh, exactly,
you know?
yes. Back to
Moving beyond the point of able, really, the ability to love yourself as you're loving someone else.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, I think with father figure, I mean, that particular song is I think it's very important because I do believe it's kind of like the heart of the album and even of the film. It's sort of the song in which it kind of explains so much about kind of the narrative or the character, which is, I think, that searching, that sense of searching because of absence and sort of that need to kind of fulfill that that presence that's necessary in a development of anyone.
Absolutely, yeah. The core lyric is no father, figure it out on your own. I know from the piece with Chris that you lost your father when you were young. And so there is an analogy between the protagonist in the movie and you. You were talking about this song being the heart of the record. I think that that phrase, figure it out on your own, is so pregnant with meaning. The idea, and across both of your full-length records, there's the focus on doing the work, and that is one's to do, and that fits with the on one's own. So to some extent, all of us are figuring out how to be oneself on one's own. In the particular way in which you're drawing on your personal experience of figuring it out on your own with the absence of your father. It is very, very, very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I think like maybe even going back to that George Michael song, you know, where it's like, tell me what you want me to be and I'll be it, you know, this idea that it can be sort of fluid. And I think that, again, we do what we know, even if we don't like it, even if it hurts us, it's like, that's what we know. So if your experience is kind of, you know, very limited of who this like parental figure is in your life, you might go down a similar path because that's a form of almost connecting to that person in your life, you know. A lot of times I think people who have lost a parent or a loved one, even like particularly to issues that are related to either mental health or substance abuse, like you can feel that by almost adapting that, you feel closer to them, you're trying to understand them. And I think that that was, at least within the short film, we get to see a glimpse of that within the protagonist. But also the kind of like the narrative of the album is speaking to that, in which it's like, and we might touch on this, but the song Stormborn, in which like, there's a line in it which says, can you tell me why you only see me at the bottom of a bottle when I'm not there? And so I came to join you on the kitchen floor to finally see the version that you left me for, but all I see is your spitting image. So this idea that like, in doing this thing, it's empty, because that you can't be that other person, like doing that. Those acts don't necessarily bring you closer to the relationship that you are missing, because the relationship is very different. It's one that's born out of what you would hope is like love and guidance and protection. And so you're sort of left to your own devices to figure out how to be that. And I think we all are given that task, right? We're children, we mature into adolescence, and then we are adults, and we have to be our own parents, we have to be able to take care of ourselves. And so it's not something that is, we're all going to have to do. Sometimes some of us are just kind of pushed a little more traumatically out of the nest than when we're ready.
Absolutely.
And we're like, but it was going to always have to be our task anyways. And so I think that particular song is really kind of like, maybe kind of talking about this idea of that there wasn't that particular love that was really necessary, I think. And this idea of kind of recreating it in other people. And later on in the record, we get to a place of recognition that love really can't be created by anyone else, that in the end, it's through that kind of bond that you learn how to give that to yourself. And it's difficult when you haven't had kind of like a consistent, stable bond to kind of create that, but it's still possible. You still have to, and inevitably, in order to kind of, I think, find some sense of peace.
Absolutely, yeah.
And power too.
Peace and power too, yeah. Those two end up going together. I think of peace being the presence of a certain powerful energy as opposed to like the absence of conflict.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we've been talking about some of the themes in the second half of the record, as you were talking about the very, very, very understandable appeal of kind of emulating the behavior of the person that one wants to connect with. I was thinking about the song IRL, and so obviously in real life, and the kind of chemistry of real connection.
Yeah.
And then the song that you referenced, Stormborn, is the penultimate track, so the final track with lyrics. And some of those lyrics include told me pain is the only way to make it real, but stopping short of killing ourselves won't help us heal. There's a thing you can't surrender, and there are storms that you must weather. And I've put a big bubble around this and an asterisk. This must be important. I know you live inside the chaos that's your home, but it's your choice again, to stay or move out on your own. And it's my lesson to learn the only change that I can count on is not staying the same. That's a helpful piece of wisdom.
I think so.
To more of a person as they try to become themselves. As we near the end of part one of our conversation, and kind of set the scene for part two, which we'll resume on the VFW stage after Annie's sound journey and before Chance's movement workshop and hip-hop set. After watching the 15-minute short film, Pursuit and the Elusive, let's talk a little bit about music that doesn't have words, because there are two songs on Pursuit and the Elusive that don't have words, and they're Pursuit and the Elusive.
Yeah.
And they seem to be like the end of part one and the end of part two.
Yeah.
With Stormborn transitioning into and the Elusive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel like analogous songs on Death Before Morning are Portion Control Part 1 and
right.
Portion Control Part 2, where there are very few lyrics.
Yeah.
So perhaps through referencing any number of those four songs, could you say a little bit about the significance of how music heals us beyond what the lyrics are doing, and the significance of drawing attention to those two instrumental songs? And of course, I think we should shout out Nightstone.
Oh, yeah,
I'm surprised
absolutely.
I haven't made that happen. Ice Step and Laserbeak.
Yeah.
You draw attention to those two instrumental tracks, both in the placement at the end of part 1 and part 2, essentially, and through the title of the record, referencing them.
Yeah.
What is the significance of those songs? What is the significance of ending each side with these non-vocal songs? And how does music heal us beyond, obviously, just through the lyrics?
Yeah, I think, so the significance of both those instrumental tracks, I think it's definitely sort of a feeling. I think that it's really kind of drawing on people's, sort of encouraging them to have imagination. And even within sort of the title of what the song is, but also where they're positioned. So Pursuit is positioned after the song Morning Star, which is really talking about this idea sort of faith, looking at sort of natural elements of like there being, dawn, that the sun will always come out, that the morning star will always happen before the sun, even if we're not able to see it, that it exists. And this idea that it's always darkest before dawn. So it's this idea of kind of like waiting in position. It's a song about sort of faith and sort of that uncertainty, but still choosing to kind of bet on it, that it is going to happen. And that might be that decision right before you do make a change. So then we're headed into Pursuit, and just sort of musically, it's very similar to Morning Star. It is kind of seen, I think for myself and for my live band, as well as like an outro to that song. So it's kind of like, then what happens? So it's kind of this almost stalking, like driving beat that's allowing you to kind of like almost carry you through into this next thing. It's like very almost bass heavy and like determined. And then we are, talking about And the Elusive. Again, that sort of place after Stormborn, which is this song that sort of, I think is really a declaration of this, I'm going to focus on myself. I'm going to let this battle, I'm going to let this role that I was assigned that I never really chose, I'm going to let it all go. And I'm going to step into my own direction. I'm going to step into my own messiness, my own chaos, my own storm, and find, I guess, sort of a new point of becoming, new patterning. And the Elusive, again, it's very different in the sense of it's kind of like feels more frequency driven, more synth, definitely more playful, this idea of kind of lightness in a way, and there's some kind of found dialogue within it as well that it's very interesting. It's my family were like watching this paraglider try to land, and it looks like they're going to land right in the ocean and they're not going to make it. And so there's this idea of like, are they going to make it? Aren't they going to make it? You'll hear them talking in Spanish, and then, yay, they are going to make it. And there's this like, bravo, at the end. So it's idea that this journey is maybe, going to be a bit insecure, but to sort of have some faith, and really believe that it's all going to be okay.
Yeah. I feel that we're back in practice for relief territory again. And it's almost like that final track on the record is the soundtrack to having made room for joy.
Yes. Yep.
So one final thing to kind of set the stage for our part 2 of our conversation on Saturday, August 3rd. And that's to do with music again, and the breadth of music beyond. Your 2 LPs sound quite different from one another.
Yeah, definitely.
And they both, speaking of the VFW, Malamania, in the recent piece before your big Turf Club celebration of the record, Chris Reimenschneider shared that you unprompted brought up the connection between your work with Malamania and salsa and the record that we've been discussing throughout this interview, which of course on the surface level doesn't sound like Malamania.
Right.
And what you said there was that there is, however, something similar to what salsa music does, insofar as what salsa music does is often takes really intense subject matter and difficult history and puts it into, I'm quoting you here, jubilant percussion, heavy music with big, bright horn sections. Could you explain why I'm talking about Malamania in the first place, and the continuity between salsa music and this original music of yours that you're discussing? And then also noise music. If I understand correctly, at one of the noise parties at Mortimer's, you did a noise set.
Yeah, I did.
And that was one of my highlights of that noise party, which is, again, a completely different style of music.
Yeah.
So as a precursor to part 2 of our conversation within the Music Heals Us event, could you expand a little bit on your engagement in styles of music that we haven't talked at all about today, salsa and or noise, and how those relate to your healing?
Yeah. Well, so similarly, like what you quoted, I grew up with salsa music all my life. My mom was in the first salsa band in Minnesota. It was Sabroson, and Sabroson, came out of the 70s, kind of closely linked to Macalester College, but I think it was really a mixture of a lot of influences, a lot of different drum patterns that were sort of talking about the everyday life of the people who were singing it. But there were also a lot of tensions that were happening. There was a lot of not only just celebration, but I think almost like celebration as an act of defiance and an act of resistance to kind of what was happening in the world. So in particular, with the album Pursuit and the Elusive, for me, it feels similarly that I'm talking about these themes of loss, of absence, even betrayal, of unbecoming, of choice. And through all of it, it's like we dance, we're allowing energy to kind of like move through us, and to be able to kind of like redefine that it doesn't have to be an act which is kind of like stagnant, or that feels like almost not morose, but I think a bit stoic. And for me, Death Before Morning, there was elements of kind of just observation, of kind of like a respectful observation or of mourning, in which it didn't feel as celebratory. It felt very much so as like something that we needed to kind of like hold and examine within our own experience. But Pursuit and the Elusive is, by nature of its heavy electronic, themes created by Laserbeak and Icetep, incredible artists. It really is meant to really gather people and to kind of form that connection and that expression through the body, which is why it was so important to work with the director and co-writer and producer Laura Robards, to show that this isn't just a dance album, that this really is a way to be able to use dance to investigate difficult themes of identity and to create pathways for healing. Mm-hmm. So, like, talking about that correlation, I guess, with salsa music and also, my time in Malamania and even creating, experimental music like noise music or just different vocal layers or atonal or arrhythmic music. It all feels like it comes from this sense of like expression and this idea of kind of like confidence. Granted, noise is very different from salsa because of structure in and of itself, right?
Yes.
But I feel like whenever you make art, it's really about, for you as the maker, the intention that you're putting behind it. So if you yourself have the same intention, then there's a connection with it, whether or not that's like received by the audience.
Yeah.
Like doing the noise set was just really fun because it was just like a moment to kind of play around. And I think like
you played around as everyone else was, I suppose. You were very intentional about like where you would be in the room, and it was like visually very interesting that you were right by the door to the Oliver's space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, there's so much intention and curation that happens with events that people aren't even aware of.
Yeah.
But that particular set, I was invited to perform as part of this group and or experience, I should say. And yeah, that was very thought out by the curators on like where everybody should be placed. And I think that if I hadn't had my time, in Malamania, I might not know when it's time to come in and when it's time to lay out. Like very much when you play in a band, it's kind of like, am I adding something or am I playing for the sake of being heard? And
right.
I don't need to always be heard. I want to be able to kind of add and collaborate with other people. And having, I think, like a supportive place to play, it makes it joyful, makes it healing, makes it hopefully welcoming for those who are playing, but also felt for those who are listening to it. I mean, there's going to be experiences of art that you go like, what did I just see? I need to talk about this, or I don't feel safe and I need to my nervous system needs to calm down.
Right.
And that might be the intention of the artist behind it, is to just literally disturb you. But I think for myself, I really try as much as I can to create work and to create spaces that might provoke the same questions, but don't feel disruptive, don't feel disruptive isn't the right word.
Agitating, extremely agitating.
Don't feel disturbing in the sense that your cortisol levels are up and you're feeling unsafe and you're feeling sort of like triggered in that way. It might move or provoke something to you and agitate you, but in a way that you feel like there's a pathway to be supported and at least to kind of open something up that, and I think hopefully in a loving way.
Yep. It brings up material, but also perhaps brings up material to work with, but also creates a container within which one can work with that material.
So you can process it, and there isn't just like, I don't know what to do with this, and I feel, again, alienated.
Yes. Yeah, I love that it's fun that there was this unexpected continuity between Malamania and the noise set. That was a fun little surprise. What I really love about this, for me, unprecedented scenario where we're coming to the end now of part one of a conversation is that there's so many things that on the basis of what you've been saying in the last 5 or 10 minutes, I'm like, I want to ask this, and this, and this, and this now, but I can't. So I already have at least 4 of my questions prepared.
Oh, great.
For part 2, which is, of course, again going to be on Saturday, August 3rd. at the Uptown VFW. The event's going to start at 7, doors are at 7. Arrive early so that you can set an intention and settle in the space before Annie Fitzgerald takes us on the 7:30 sound journey. The time that we'll be showing The Pursuit and the Elusive movie will then be 8:10. So please don't arrive at 8:08.
Be prompt as much as you can be.
Because the sound journey will definitely, I think, is a part of the journey that will go on that night. But 8:10. We'll have The Pursuit and the Elusive short film, and then around about 8:25 or so, then we'll resume where
we left off here.
We're passing on the baton to to those future selves. Thank you very much for deciding right before this interview that we'd like to have it be a 2-part one, and that you'd like to showcase the movie. We have hopes to do so in a particularly interesting way, I suppose. Just to wrap up, what will be, if we manage to pull it off, which I think we've established technologically we're able to, what will be unusual about the way in which the movie is shown?
So the film, again, I would just want to shout out director Laura Robards. I haven't said her name enough, but incredible director, artist, who also co-wrote the piece and co-produced it with me. This piece was created with Brian Scalick, who works with 360 technology. So the film is shot in 360 video, meaning that it's not just one perspective, a 2D perspective, but you can really see at all angles. So it was meant to be viewed in a headset in which it has the technology to look at all different angles. And our hope is that someone can wear this headset and it's through their personal experience that's being projected onto a larger screen that the rest of the audience is able to experience it as well. So it's sort of like a one-player mode, and you're watching somebody kind of go through this world.
Yeah. And then at some point, then some of those audience members, not like during the event, but at some point in the future, they would be able to experience it firsthand.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's an interactive experience.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm really excited for that. I'm excited to discuss that after when we pick up that baton. In the meantime, thank you very much for coming here today for part 1.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all your preparation and the correlations you found within my work, and allowing me to, I think, see new patterns as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm holding back so that we have a good starting point for part 2. Come and join us, viewers, at the VFW on Saturday, August 3rd for that. In the meantime, thank you for watching this episode. I'm Simon Calder. There'll be another episode next week, broadcast at 10 p.m. on MCN6. This is Lady Midnight. Thank you, Lady Midnight, for joining us today. We'll be back next week.
Thank you.
Yay. That went well.
Awesome. Yeah.